If you guys remember the old tale of Lamb and how Aleister Crowley sort of did this weird working, this sex magic thing, and ended up actually, I don't know, what do you say, like coming into encountering, let's say, an entity by the name of Lamb. So the idea that Aleister Crowley introduced the concept of the gray alien to the collective subconscious through his depiction of the entity Lamb is a topic of interest in both occult and ufology circles. Crowley, a renowned occultist, described an encounter with a preternatural entity named Lamb, Lam, which he believed he had contacted through a process called the Amalantra working, I think is how you say it. The image of Lamb, as drawn by Crowley, bears a striking resemblance to the modern depiction of gray aliens, despite predating the popularization of such imagery. Kenneth Grant, a writer who knew Crowley personally, expanded on the nature of Lamb, and some occultists and ufologists have retroactively linked Lamb to later encounters with gray aliens. Some even suggest that Crowley's ritualistic workings opened a portal for extra-dimensional entities like Lamb to visit our world. Now, that in particular seems wild, right? It seems like a wild notion. Well, the weird part is, so you as usual, you can look at this a ton of different ways. Help me test the phone line tonight if you guys would be so kind. 702-957-1037. We are taking your calls there. If you want to be part of the show, click the Discord link at troubledminds.org. Now, back to this, the Lamb stuff. Now, it's one thing to conjure entities, okay? It's another thing to sort of come up with the idea of some sort of dimensional or whatever, again, like Slender Man, okay? Think in those terms. Because if you look at it this way and consider that maybe, just maybe, we have a situation happening where this stuff kind of enters the collective subconscious, enters the zeitgeist through, one way or the other. And in this case, Lamb itself, it's supposedly a race, not an entity, a race of entities or something. And let me get you a depiction of what Lamb looks like, by the way, because it's pretty creepy. But I think this is what we may be dealing with. And as usual, right, I think one of the more important aspects of these conversations is that we, not necessarily, and this is not, let's say, specific to everything, to every damn thing, okay? It's not. It's specific to a concept that instead of looking outward, we sort of look inward for a lot of these answers. And that right there on the screen is Lamb. You guys probably remember this back in what was the damn date? I think it was 1911 is when, no, 1919. Anyway, so somewhere back at the turn of the 1900s, this entity was written about, and this depiction was drawn and given to a magazine publication or something to this effect. Anyway, again, my memory's foggy on the aspects here, but the deal is this, right? So if we're talking about like an entity like Slender Man, and don't forget that Slender Man himself actually ended up causing, some twisted young tweens to stab their friend, right? What's up? If it helps, for me, you sound very clear still, just more quiet without me lowering your volume. Nice. Top heavy. What's up, Holy? Top heavy. All right. Okay. I can't really change any of that right now, but basically, since we started, it's a make or break situation. So if it's ugly, well, we'll kill it and I'll come back tomorrow. But if it's not, then we'll just keep on trucking and have to deal with what we got. Because like I said, it's hard to fix things or not fix things. Anyway, so as you're live streaming, I mean, okay. So anyway, so back to this, right? So back to the Slender Man analogy to this. Now, the weird part is that we actually continue with, these ideas of these entities, and, Slender Man, we know was a sort of a wikipasta, an actual situation that happened that was not, let's say, not a real entity from the days of yore. Okay, it was not a mythological entity. It was not an entity from folklore. It was something. It was a modern creation. Okay, so now if we go back to Lamb and think of it in the same sense, there's a situation happening where maybe Lamb was sort of the Slender Man of the early 1900s. And what I mean is that the idea of a gray alien really hadn't entered into the zeitgeist itself at the point, right? Okay, and so Oh, top heavy. Okay, the lamb's head. Yeah, definitely top heavy. All right, one sec. We're gonna check this out and make sure that everything's working because, like I said, I had to redo all the audio. So I am a little more quiet because I brought down all the volume. So hopefully we don't have any popping and hissing. So anyway, all right. So let's take this phone call real quick just to make sure that our audio is working properly. Let's go to James in Michigan. What's up, James? You're on Troubled Minds. How are you? Can you hear me? Go right ahead.
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just listening on the phone right now. I have everything else turned down, and you sound fine on all the major platforms. The ones I had on anyway: Discord, Rockfin, and the station. So everything seems good so far.
Nice. I appreciate it. So now everything seems to be working. Cross your fingers. You're the best, James. Thank you very much. I know you're just popping into call. If you got more, pop into the Discord because you sound way better over there. Okay. Appreciate the phone call. Unless you have anything to add, of course.
No, that was it. I will definitely call back later.
Appreciate it.
Discord.
Thank you. You're the best.
All right.
You're the best. Thanks for the test phone call. That's James in Michigan. You know him, you love him. Salcedo Paranormal, always helping me out when he can and testing out some things that I can't because I only have so many tentacles, and that's that. Okay, so back to this weird part. All right, now Lamb itself. Okay, so that's good. And +1, the phone number's working. What do you guys know about Lamb? 702-957-1037. Click the Discord link at troubledminds.org. Okay, now back to this. So again, sort of the idea of an entity infiltrating the zeitgeist, okay, or the collective subconscious. I think this is what we're dealing with. And again, as usual, I'm probably going to change my mind tomorrow about this, but it feels like we're sort of in this new space of creating things. And again, we're sort of talking about creating AI entities, things like this, and really manipulating or adding to the zeitgeist with just ideas. Manipulation, maybe. How do you want to look at it, I guess? But so the question tonight is this. Number one, instead of looking inside or looking outside to, let's say, Alpha Centauri for the gray aliens, looking inside of us to sort of this collective subconscious or the zeitgeist itself, the sign of the times, it's in the air, this type of thing. Are we creating these entities as part of this folklore version of hyper-reality is basically the question number one. Okay, and what I mean by that is this may be exactly what we're looking at with the idea of Lamb. Now, back to where this all began in let me read a little bit more. So the notion that Lamb and the gray aliens are one and the same is held by some groups within the Ordo Templi Orientis, an occult order that Crowley was involved with. These groups, such as the Cult of Lamb, believe that contact with non-human entities like Lamb is an integral component of spiritual growth. Now, that's exactly part of the issue here, okay? Because what exactly are these gray aliens? Because when you look at the larger concept of what these things are, it's kind of terrifying because we have the whole bit of, alien abductions and that whole bit. And I don't know if Jen's out there. Shout out Jen. She did a show on this, Arcane Observer, a ways back on her channel. And she, not this exact thing, but she was talking about that the alien abduction phenomenon might possibly be happening in the astral realm. So it's not happening here. It's not happening in our mind. We're outside of ourselves in some sort of astral travel. And that's where this thing is actually happening. We're encountering these entities elsewhere, which again is where Crowley has suggested that he met this entity named Lamb. He was doing some sort of out-of-body work, which he was known to do. And it was part of this working called Almalantra, I think is how you say it. But anyway, so it's important to note, of course, blah, 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 all the disclaimers. By the way, all the disclaimers track. There's no truth here, just ideas, just looking at the world in a different way and considering that maybe there's something happening out there that's not, let's say, on the beaten path of discovery. So let's blaze the trails and consider these things. And again, drinking the maybe juice as always, which means it's the mark of an educated mind to consider a thought without accepting it. Okay, that's really what this has always been about, these conversations. Okay, so number one, is it possible that the gray aliens themselves are not at all what we expect them to be, meaning that they're not little green men from Alpha Centauri. That's the most basic aspect of these little green men that people have been talking about and considering for almost forever, the last 100 years approximately. But beyond that, I think that maybe there's a spiritual aspect to these entities. Now, also, okay, so that's the first question. Is it possible that all this is way off? It's way wrong, and instead we're dealing with sort of astral travelers or something to this effect? Number two, it is strange that in the past, or many of the mainstream accounts of this, what would you say, the gray entity, the gray alien, are actually biomechanical, okay, which goes back to that Bob Lazar, as humans are vessels, things like this. We talked about that kind of semi-recently. But then also the other aspect of biomechanical, meaning that they can travel vast distances in space by not actually being, actually organic entities. There's some sort of, hybrid robotic, cold AI entity, okay, non-human intelligence in the aspect of the entities themselves as just basically like robots, like what, Data from Star Trek, something to that effect, except a little more let's say cold and not as warm and fuzzy as good old Data from Star Trek. But anyway, so I'm a little bit of a mess because, like I said, dealing with some new audio stuff, hoping everything works. Cross your fingers. Thanks, James, for the test call. And so, okay, so the other thing here is, so we have the aliens as spiritual entities. Do you think that's real or not? The second thing is, how come most of the sort of ideas recently in the last, I don't know, let's say in the zeitgeist or in folklore, things like this, in the alien folklore arena, ufology, that most people believe, and again, I'm saying this kind of hip shooting. I don't really know what most people believe, but it seems like the evidence suggests that these aliens, gray aliens, are actually biomechanical entities. And maybe, just maybe, this is why they care about our souls as containers. And we talked about that during the Bob Lazar episode, a couple weeks back. Okay, so that's where we're at. And those are the questions as we start. Why is there this weird juxtaposition of the two things? And do you think that maybe, just maybe, we're dealing with sort of the Slender Man from the early 1900s as conjured by Aleister Crowley and his good friend Kenneth Grant, which is kind of weird. So here we go. So the gray alien as a spiritual entity has its roots in various sources, which is the amazing part, including the experiences of individuals who claim to have had encounters with extraterrestrial beings, as well as the broader cultural and spiritual context in which these experiences are interpreted. The gray alien, characterized by its humanoid form, long limbs, large black eyes, small noses, thin mouths, and gray skin or clothing, is a common depiction of extraterrestrial life in popular culture. This depiction became popularized following the Barney and Betty Hill abduction claim in 1961, which described an encounter with beings that resembled the modern conception of gray aliens. Okay, but 1961 isn't the only spot. I was kind of looking for sort of a cascade effect of where this began back in the early 1900s with Crowley, and again, his astral projection, his astral self, encountering these entities known as Lamb, maybe as a race of entities and not an individual, but basically being able to trace that idea that sort of slowly permeated into the zeitgeist, and then be able to sort of track where these ideas of these gray aliens started happening in the abduction experience. Certainly, you can kind of look at this in the ancient astronaut theorists say yes way and say, well, maybe, maybe this is an ancient thing, and maybe it had nothing to do with Crowley and all the rest. That's fine. As usual, nonlinear, open-ended, and there's a lot of ways to look at this. But I think certainly in the modern, let's say, time frame since 1900 or so, we have this situation happening where, we got the Roswell in 1947, the National Security Act we've talked about a lot. But there seems to be sort of this slow ramp up from the post-Crowley age into sort of the alien age. And that, to me, kind of made my tinfoil tingle a little bit when I was looking into this a little more. So let's see. A couple things, too. Now, Crowley, again, was doing this, what's it called? The I can't even say it. What's this? Alma-Lantra workings, okay? And so this particular Lamb entity was a spiritual entity, okay? And he did see this in his astral form, I guess is what he says. So let's see. straight from the thing. So Crowley claimed to have contacted Lamb during a series of rituals known as this Amalantra workings, which he performed with his partner Roddy Minor. The term Lamb, this is interesting and wild, is Tibetan and translates to the way or path. Crowley's portrait of Lamb, which he possibly drew during the Amalantra workings, was first published in 1919. That's the date I was looking for, as the front piece of his commentary of Helena Blavatsky's The Voice of Silence. The portrait depicts an entity with a large oval head and small slanted eyes, which bears a striking resemblance to the modern depiction of gray aliens, which we have this up on the screen. I'll have a link to this down in the description as well. Okay, so a lot of things happening here, okay, with this Lamb entity. And, well, if we're in this space of sort of conjuring things into the zeitgeist, conjuring things into, let's say, the idea of the collective subconscious, it kind of feels like, even if Lamb wasn't the first, let's say, of these entities, and it does go back to ancient astronaut theorists say yes. Again, like I said, you can look at this multiple ways, but it kind of does feel like this entity itself was conjured and reintroduced into the collective subconscious around the time of Crowley. Again, we got into World War I, World War II, the Foo Fighters, and Kenneth Arnold, I believe, who was the guy with saw the original sighting of the UFOs out there, the flying saucers. I mean, it kind of feels like this led straight into that whole, a Cold War aspect of, who knows what comes next, okay? Sort of that terror and that fear of nuclear winter and all the rest coming out of two world wars. And, anyway, so the weird part is, and the question is that, is this exactly the same thing? And are these entities, again, which the gray alien has been discussed as biomechanical, as, sort of in ufology folklore, that these things are actual entities that are, non-human intelligence, more like AI. And they're here to do, experiments on us, which again, kind of get some of that from the cattle mutilation, that folklore, UFO stuff. But then, of course, you have the actual experiencers that suggest that they've been abducted by these things and had, horrific things done to them as part of the abduction phenomenon, which again is terrifying as hell to me. But I don't know. So I think when you look at this, there's a lot of ways to consider it. But basically what I want to know tonight is, what do you know about this? And is it strange that it seems like this is really the beginning of the modern little green men, or little gray men, a little gray alien as they're known? Because it seems to me, when you look at the dates and kind of track down some of this stuff, I've got some interesting correlations that kind of make the case for this, which I can do, of course. But as usual, I'd rather hear from you. Thank you to James again for testing out the phone lines. Like I said, there's I stripped down all of the audio to nothing and everything was broken. And then I built it all back up again with the old equipment, because the new one, I have an unbelievable amount of work to get never mind. I don't want to bore you with the gory details, but I've spent basically all weekend trying to fix all this crap, and hopefully it's fixed right now. So let me know. Again, audio sound check 1 2. But basically, that's the question tonight. Is it possible that this entity, the entity of the little green men, or the gray alien, has actually been put into the zeitgeist and into our minds and hearts by one Aleister Crowley, who did this and released this back in 1919. That to me seems pretty wild and pretty weird, and that's why we need to talk about this, because they're still talking about this. This is still, the alien abduction phenomenon is still a thing. You get people still dealing with this and trying to figure out what the hell's going on with it. The weird part about this one is, we've talked about UFO topoids recently, and sort of the introduction of these things into the zeitgeist, or pop-out entities, or, things like this, the fear manifestations of the human experience that are just sort of kind of becoming something to us. And not just something in terms of, maybe these are, I don't know, orbs in the sky. Okay, could be. That to me kind of screams a little bit of maybe pop-out entities, which is, again, sort of manifesting our sort of collective trauma, or even personal trauma, into these things that we see as paranormal experiences, or aliens, or, and any of this stuff. So more of the Fortean phenomenon, if you will. But I think there's a correlation here that goes all the way back to Aleister Crowley and this Lamb character, which I'll put back up on the screen here if you guys are watching the stream. Many of you are familiar with this actual concept and this entity itself, but I think we have something a little bit deeper than this, because think about this: we're still like 100 years on from the introduction of this entity, more than that, like 105 years actually. But the thing is, we're still kind of considering the idea of these gray aliens as one of the most basic UFO staples of all. And, when you talk to people, this is probably going to be, other than there's reptilians, and you guys sort of know what it looks like in the ufology and the folklore and the rest of that there's a situation happening where there are entities that people suggest they've seen in these abduction experiences, or even telepathic communications, things like this. And so this one in particular, the little green men, or the gray alien, is basically probably the most common, easily the most common, I would say, in terms of what people believe aliens to be. Matt in California, he sent me a nice book of an alien handbook that's got a bunch of different sort of depictions of what some of these other entities out there might actually be, sort of in the vein of that Galactic Federation, that type of thing, the Council of Nine in this. But I don't know. This to me seems like when you trace it all the way back, we're still dealing with the sort of echoes of this. The legacy of Lamb is what I'm calling this tonight, because I do think that maybe these entities are spiritual in some way. And, people have suggested this. Again, Tom DeLonge has suggested this, where you call it a Jesus or the Buddha, and you'll run these things off during an abduction experience. I don't know. Maybe you guys have actually encountered these abduction type experiences before, and you can maybe enlighten me on what this seems like. But it does seem to me that this is something that we're creating as again, sort of a collective subconscious sort of zeitgeist entity. And, look at all the movies, going back to E.T. and going back to Close Encounters with these very similar gray aliens coming out of the ship at the end. I mean, it's being heavily reinforced in Hollywood and other places, books and ideas, and, even on shows like this where we talk about these things. But I do wonder if this thing is not as it seems, and that, the basic premise would be something to the effect of these are spiritual entities and they're more like demons, okay? Which is probably these entities, and I've heard this a lot from normies, that these entities are probably demons.